Drop the CEO act, Margot. It doesn't suit you anymore. My younger sister Cassidy was holding her phone up so I could see everything. She had on those white coveralls she'd ordered from some industrial fashion site, the ones with her initials embroidered on the chest pocket, like she was running a Fortune 500 demolition crew. Behind her, in the middle of the floor, I had hand-sealed myself, was a pile of rubble where my proofing cabinet used to sit. A crowbar leaned against what was left of the original tin ceiling tiles. Mom and Dad signed off on this. The whole concept. This space is wasted on dough and butter. She panned the camera. I saw my grandmother's wooden rolling pin, the one with her name carved into the handle, snapped in half on the floor next to a coffee cup that wasn't mine. It's going to be a wellness studio. Cold plunges, infrared, all of it. So you're going to clear out your fridges, sign the lease assignment, and stop pretending this is yours. You haven't been here in 2 weeks. You abandoned it. We're just being efficient. My night supervisor, a woman named Daniela who had worked for me for 6 years, was the one actually holding the phone. I could hear her breathing, the ragged kind right before someone breaks. She had called me 20 minutes earlier from the alley behind the shop. My parents had shown up at 5 in the morning with a locksmith and a story about a burst pipe. They told him I had authorized the entry. He believed them because they had the same last name on their licenses as the one on the lease. I was sitting on the edge of a hotel bed in Lisbon. The window was open and I could hear someone downstairs hosing off a sidewalk. I had flown out 4 days earlier for a sourcing trip, the first real trip I had taken in 3 years that wasn't to a baking conference in Vegas or Charlotte. Daniela, I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. I need you to walk out the front door right now. Take Marco and Priya with you. Don't argue with my sister. Don't argue with my parents. I'm moving everyone's pay onto my personal LLC tonight. You'll see the deposit by Friday. Your jobs are not in danger. Just leave. I heard her say, okay. I heard the bell on the front door, the one I had bought at a flea market in Hudson, and rewired myself. Then I looked at Cassidy on the screen. She was waiting for me to scream. I could see it in her face, the way her chin was lifted. That little half smile she'd had since she was 9 and our mother used to call her spicy. She wanted me to lose it so she could record it and send it to the family group chat with the caption, Margot is having a breakdown again. Sure, I said. Just that. Then I took a screenshot of her face, the crowbar, my grandmother's broken rolling pin in the corner of the frame, and I hung up. I want you to understand something before I tell you what I did next. For most of my adult life, I have been the wallet of my family. Not the favorite, not the disappointment, the wallet. There's a difference. I'm 31 years old. I grew up in a split-level house outside Allentown, Pennsylvania, the kind of town where the mall used to be the center of everything until the mall died. My parents were school teachers who retired early and immediately started living like people who hadn't. My sister Cassidy is 26. She has been, in chronological order, an aspiring jewelry designer, a sound healer, a sustainable swimwear founder, a hot yoga instructor, a crystal importer, and most recently, a wellness curator, which as far as I can tell means she takes pictures of herself in robes. Each of these careers has cost my parents between $15,000 and $40,000. Each one has ended the same way, with my mother calling me, voice tight, saying, honey, your sister's in a tough spot. We were thinking, just to keep things civil if you could. And I always could. I paid off her studio lease in Asheville. I covered the deposit on the Brooklyn loft she abandoned after 8 months. I sent her boyfriend $3,000 when she crashed his car and didn't have insurance. I never said no. Not once. Because every time I came close to it, my mother would say something like, we just don't want there to be a rift, Margot. You know how she gets. And I knew how she got. We all knew. Cassidy had been getting that way since she was 12. Meanwhile, I built a bakery. I opened it 3 years ago in a 120-year-old commercial building on a corner in the Northern Liberties neighborhood of Philadelphia. I called it Mott Street, after the street my grandmother lived on when she came over from Sicily in 1954. I started with $80,000 in savings, a small business loan from a credit union that took 6 months to approve, and a cosigner who was not, I want to be clear, anyone in my family. It was my old culinary school instructor. The building is on the local historic register. Pennsylvania has very specific rules about what you can and cannot do to a contributing structure in a designated district. I know those rules because I spent 10 months reading them before I signed the lease. I know which interior walls are protected, which exterior alterations require a certificate of appropriateness from the Historical Commission, and exactly how much it costs to violate those rules. The fines are not small. The fines, when combined with structural damages and lease acceleration, can take a house. By the time my sister picked up that crowbar, Mott Street was doing about $420,000 a year in revenue. I had 3 full-time employees, 2 part-time employees, 2 part-time. I had a wholesale account with a coffee roaster in Fishtown and another with a hotel group downtown. I had paid off the original loan 18 months early. I had a savings cushion. I had, for the first time in my life, a financial advisor who was not my father. My family had never set foot in the bakery. I had invited them to the soft opening. My mother said she had a hair appointment. My father said he didn't like the parking. Cassidy posted a picture of herself eating a croissant from a different bakery the next day, with the caption, "Supporting Small Business." She tagged the wrong account. So when Cassidy decided last month, on what I assume was a Tuesday afternoon, that her wellness pivot needed a brick-and-mortar anchor, she didn't go look at retail spaces. She came for mine. She didn't see a business. She saw a backdrop. Exposed brick, original floors, north-facing windows. The aesthetic she'd been pinning to her mood board for years, just sitting there occupied by her unmarried older sister and a bunch of bread. I sat on that hotel bed in Lisbon for I don't know how long, maybe an hour. The light changed in the window. A woman across the courtyard was hanging laundry. I kept looking at the screenshot. Cassidy's face wasn't even angry. It was bright. She was excited. She thought she was rescuing me from a life she decided was beneath both of us. I thought about flying home. I thought about it the way you think about jumping into cold water, knowing exactly how it's going to feel. If I flew home, I would walk into that bakery and I would scream, and Cassidy would film it, and my mother would call me 3 hours later asking why I was being so cruel to my sister, who was only trying to help, and could I please just hear her out, and by the way, your father isn't sleeping well. This stress is going to kill him. I had lived that script enough times to know every line. There's a thing my old instructor told me once, back when I was 23 and learning how to laminate dough. He said the worst thing you can do with a mistake in pastry is fight it. If your butter breaks, you don't try to force it back. You let it do what it wants to do and you adjust. You ride the failure into something else. Cassidy was a runaway train. My parents were standing on the tracks, waving her through. If I planted my feet, I'd be the one who got hit, so I opened my laptop. I did not call my lawyer that night. I called him in the morning after I had thought about exactly what I wanted. His name is Howard Fenster. He's a 62-year-old commercial real estate attorney who had handled my original lease and who, 3 years earlier, had quietly suggested I never put my parents' names on anything related to the bakery. I had listened to him then. I was about to listen to him again. I told him what was happening. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Margot, what do you want?" I said, "I want them to do it to themselves. I don't want my fingerprints on it." He said, "Okay, then here's what we're going to do." What we drafted over the course of the next 36 hours was a document that on its face looked like a peace offering. It was titled Interim Operations and Build-Out Authorization Agreement. The cover page made it sound generous, even apologetic. Margot Salerno, lessee of record, hereby authorizes the following parties to assume operational and renovation oversight of the premises located at the address you don't need. The bait was on page 2. A line item, upon execution, lessee of record will release the existing operating reserve and the amount of $22,500 to the renovation account. Said funds to be used at the discretion of the project lead, $22,500. I knew Cassidy. I knew that number would unfocus her eyes. She had been telling our mother for weeks that she needed cold plunge tubs from some company in Sweden that cost $8,000 apiece. She would see that number and she would not read another word. The poison was on pages 4 through 7. Section 4.3 stated that the project lead and any signing guarantors assumed full personal liability for any and all alterations to the premises, including but not limited to violations of municipal historic district ordinances, structural modifications, and any damages to load-bearing or contributing elements. Section 5.1 stated that the lessee of record was indemnified from any actions taken under this agreement. Section 6.2 stated that personal guarantors agreed to be liable for any acceleration of the underlying lease in the event of breach, up to and including the remaining lease value, which at that moment was 11 months of rent, totaling about $96,000. I sent it to Cassidy and copied my parents. I wrote a short email above it. I'm tired. You win. I'm in Portugal, and I don't have the energy to fight this. Sign this. The operating money is yours, and please just don't drag my employees into your mess. I'll pull my name from the utilities once you've taken over. I sent it at 3 in the afternoon Lisbon time. By 3:14, I had 3 signed copies in my inbox. Cassidy, my mother, my father. None of them had asked a single question. None of them had forwarded it to a lawyer. My mother's signature was the kind of loose cursive she used on Christmas cards. My father had signed in all caps like he always did. I stared at those 3 signatures for a while. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt the way you feel when you realize someone you love isn't going to be okay, and there's nothing left for you to do about it. I closed my laptop. I went down to the hotel bar and I ordered a glass of Vinho Verde, and I sat there until it got dark. For the next 2.5 weeks, I watched my sister redecorate my life on Instagram. She had decided to keep the bakery's account, since it had 11,000 followers, and she was just going to rebrand it in real time. The first post was a black and white picture of her in those coveralls, sledgehammer over her shoulder, captioned, "Out with the dough, in with the divine." She tore down my proofing room. She posted a video of herself swinging a sledgehammer at the wall between the front of house and the kitchen, the wall that, if she had read any of the documents I had on file with the Historical Commission, she would have known was a primary load-bearing partition for the 2nd-floor apartment above the shop. She captioned it, "Removing the limitation that has held this space hostage." The comments were full of hearts and fire emojis. My mother commented, "So proud of my entrepreneur." My father, who had never in his life used social media before Cassidy started getting him to like her posts, commented, "Looking good, kiddo." I watched it all from a rented studio apartment in Northern Liberties, 4 blocks from the bakery. I had flown back from Lisbon and I had not gone home to my own apartment because my parents had a key. I sat in that studio with the blinds drawn and I worked. I called my insurance broker on day 3. I had a business interruption policy that I had paid extra for, the kind that triggers if the premises become inoperable due to causes including third-party action. I made sure my paperwork was current. It was. I called Howard again on day 5. He confirmed that my position was clean. The agreement was airtight. As long as I didn't intervene, didn't give Cassidy advice, didn't do anything that could be construed as resuming operational control, I was a passive lessee whose space had been overrun by parties who had voluntarily assumed liability. On day 8, I called the city. I did not call the police. The police don't care about renovation disputes. I called the Department of Licenses and Inspections directly, the Historic Preservation Division. I gave my name. I am not the kind of person who hides behind anonymous tips, and Howard had told me the case was stronger if I went on record. I told the woman on the phone, very calmly, that I was a lessee of record at a contributing property in a designated historic district, that unauthorized demolition was occurring on the premises, that a load-bearing wall had been removed, that there were no permits on file, and that the work was being documented in real time on a public Instagram account called Mott Street Wellness. I gave her the handle, I gave her the address, I gave her my contact information. She asked me how confident I was about the load-bearing wall. I said I had the original architectural drawings in my email and I could send them within 5 minutes. She said, "Please do." She called me back 40 minutes later and asked if I could be available for a site inspection at a date to be determined. I said I could be available any morning between 9 and noon for the next month. The grand opening was scheduled for a Saturday. Cassidy had been promoting it for 2 weeks. She had called the new business Ember and Bloom, which I gathered was an acronym for nothing, and she had hired a photographer and someone she described as a vibrational sound facilitator. There was going to be a ribbon cutting. There were going to be cucumber waters. The local wellness micro-influencer scene was going to be there in force. I sat in my rental car across the street at 9:45 that morning. The bakery, which was no longer my bakery, looked beautiful in a way that made me sick. The windows were full of dried pampas grass and beige linen. There was a sandwich board on the sidewalk with hand-lettered chalk that read, "Step into your most aligned self." Cassidy had hung gauzy curtains in the front, the kind that hide that the inside is, in fact, a construction zone. I pulled up the live stream on my phone. Cassidy was inside in a cream-colored caftan, hair in soft waves, holding a champagne flute full of something orange. My mother was next to her in a navy suit jacket. My father was wearing a tie. He had not worn a tie to my college graduation. "I just want to thank my parents," Cassidy was saying, her voice trembling in that practiced way she had been doing since she was 11 and tried out for school plays, for believing in this when no one else could see it, for helping me liberate this space from its limited past. My mother dabbed her eyes. My father put his arm around Cassidy. The camera panned. I saw it before any of them did. Above the new opening where my proofing room wall had been, a long crack was running diagonally across the ceiling. It was the kind of crack that does not stop. White dust was sifting down onto the floor in a slow, steady fall, like flour through a sieve. One of the influencers was wiping her shoulder. I checked the time. 9:58. A sedan pulled up behind me. Howard got out, briefcase in hand, suit pressed. He nodded at me through the window and walked across the street and stood by the door of the bakery. A white pickup truck pulled up in front of him, the city seal on the door. A man in a vest and a hard hat got out, followed by a woman with a tablet. Behind them, a second vehicle, an unmarked car. 2 officers from the police department's commercial enforcement unit, there to keep the peace if needed. I saw Cassidy lift her glass on my screen. To new beginnings. The front door opened. What happened next, I watched both on the live stream and through my windshield. And I'm going to tell you exactly the way it unfolded. The inspector, a man whose name I would later learn was Ronald Kemp, walked through the front door and stopped about 6 feet inside. He didn't say a word at first. He just looked up at the ceiling. Then he looked at the wall, or the place where the wall used to be. Then he looked at the people in the room with their champagne flutes. "Whose project is this?" he said. There was a beat of silence. The sound facilitator had stopped striking her bowl. The photographer lowered his camera. Cassidy, to her credit, recovered quickly. "I'm the project lead, Cassidy Salerno. Is there a problem? Because we're in the middle of a private event, and I don't think you have a warrant to. This is a contributing structure in a locally designated historic district," Ronald Kemp said. His voice was bored. He had said this before. He would say it again. "I need to see your work permits, your structural engineer's report, and your certificate of appropriateness from the Historical Commission." Cassidy laughed. It was that high laugh she did. "I don't need any of that. My sister handles all that. She's the lessee. I'm just renovating." "Your sister is the lessee?" "Margot Salerno. But she signed everything over to me." "We have a document." Howard stepped forward at this point. He had been waiting in the back. "I'd be happy to provide the document," he said, very politely. And he opened his briefcase. "I'm going to skip ahead because I want you to see this part, the way I saw it." Cassidy had set up a projector on the back wall, the one that had been running her logo, and a slideshow of her founder story. Howard, who had asked permission from Inspector Kemp, plugged in a small device and the projector switched. The first slide was the cover page of the agreement. Cassidy's signature. My mother's signature. My father's signature. The second slide was section 4.3, the personal liability clause. The third slide was a screenshot from her own Instagram. Cassidy's sledgehammer raised mid-swing at the load-bearing wall. The caption was right there underneath, removing the limitation. The fourth slide was the original architectural drawing of the building, the one I had sent the inspector 5 days earlier, with the load-bearing wall highlighted in red. The fifth slide was a list of fines for unpermitted alteration of a contributing structure in this particular historic district. The base fine was $85,000, plus restoration costs, plus emergency stabilization, plus a separate criminal referral if the alteration was found to be reckless. My mother sat down on a bench that wasn't sturdy enough for her. My father was looking at the wall behind Cassidy as if he had just realized, for the first time, that walls hold up ceilings. Cassidy turned to me, even though I wasn't there. She turned to the camera, the one that was still live streaming her grand opening to her 2,000 viewers. "This is my sister doing this," she said. Her voice cracked. "She's punishing me. She has always been jealous of me. She set me up." Howard cleared his throat. "Miss Salerno, Just to clarify, your sister is not the project lead under this agreement? You are. You and your parents personally guaranteed all damages. What does that mean? It means, Howard said, in the same patient voice my fourth-grade teacher used on the kids who weren't paying attention, that you owe the city $85,000 in fines. You owe the building's ownership the cost of structural restoration, which I would estimate conservatively at $200,000. And under the lease acceleration clause, which your parents personally guaranteed, you owe $96,000 in remaining rent, payable within 30 days. The next part I want to be careful about, because I don't want to make it sound like I enjoyed it. I didn't exactly. It was more like the feeling you get when something heavy you've been holding for a long time finally hits the ground. The inspector ordered the building evacuated. He put a red placard on the front door. He called for a structural engineer to come out that afternoon to determine if the second-floor apartment, which had a tenant, needed to be evacuated as well. The tenant, by the way, was a graduate student from Drexel, and her landlord, the building owner, would later find out that her ceiling had been compromised and would join a separate civil action against my parents. Cassidy filed for personal bankruptcy within 6 weeks. The wellness brand collapsed instantly. Her followers turned on her overnight, and the sledgehammer video became a meme that's still floating around. There's a remix of it, set to Wrecking Ball, with about 3 million views. I have not watched it, but I have been told. My parents had pledged their house as collateral against the personal guarantee. I know this because Howard found out from the title search. They had refinanced 8 months earlier to give Cassidy $30,000 for what she called her launch capital. When the judgment came down, the bank moved on the house within 90 days. They couldn't pay, the foreclosure went through, and they ended up in a 2-bedroom condo in Bethlehem, about 40 minutes from Allentown. My mother called me 11 times in the first week. I let it go to voicemail. On the 12th call, I picked up. She was crying. She said, "How could you do this to your own family?" I said, "Mom, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to think about it before you answer. Did I send Cassidy in there with a crowbar?" She didn't answer. I said, "I love you. I'm not going to talk about this with you for a while," and I hung up. I have not spoken to her since. That was 4 months ago. My insurance came through fast. The policy covered me because the damage was done by a third party operating under a written agreement that explicitly indemnified me. I got a check large enough to make me pause when I opened the envelope. I didn't reopen Mott Street in the old building. I couldn't have if I'd wanted to. The building is still under structural review, and the owner is in litigation with my parents and Cassidy, which will probably take years. Instead, I leased a production kitchen in Kensington. It's in an old textile mill that was converted 10 years ago. It's not pretty from the outside. It's a beige industrial building with no signage and a roll-up door. Inside, I have a deck oven I imported from France, a proofing room 3 times the size of my old one, and a wholesale operation that supplies 12 restaurants and 4 cafes across the city. I don't have a storefront. I don't want one. I gave Daniela a raise and a title. She's the production manager now. Marco runs Morning Bake. Priya is in pastry school part-time on a stipend I'm paying her. We are doing, if you can believe it, almost double what we used to do at the storefront. Wholesale margins are better. Restaurant chefs pay on time. I sent 1 email to my parents and Cassidy after the dust settled. It was 3 sentences. You wanted the space. You signed for it. You own what happened. Then I blocked them on everything. There's a question I get from people who know the story, usually after a couple of drinks, and I want to answer it before I stop talking. The question is, do I feel guilty? About my parents losing their house. About Cassidy filing for bankruptcy. About the meme. The honest answer is no, and I have thought about that a lot. I have sat with it. I have asked myself if there's a part of me that's broken because I don't feel guilty. I don't think there is. I think for 30 years I felt guilty about everything. I felt guilty about being more responsible than my sister. I felt guilty about earning more than my parents. I felt guilty about not visiting enough. I felt guilty about visiting and being tired. I felt guilty when I said no. And I felt guilty when I said no. And I felt guilty when I said yes. Somewhere around the time I watched my sister kick my grandmother's rolling pin across the floor, I had refinished by hand that feeling burned out of me. It hasn't come back. I don't think it's going to. If you've ever watched the people who are supposed to love you treat you like a resource instead of a person, I'd love to hear about it. Tell me where you're listening from, and tell me what you did when you finally stopped being the wallet. I read every one of these. I think about that morning in Lisbon a lot. The light coming through the window, the woman hanging laundry across the courtyard, my sister's face frozen on a screenshot in my hand. I could have done a dozen things in that moment. I could have screamed. I could have caught the next flight. I could have begged my parents to call Cassidy off. I had done all of those things before, in smaller versions every year of my adult life. None of them had ever changed anything. The pattern only ended the day I stopped feeding it. What happened to my sister? What happened to my parents? None of it was something I did to them. I want to be clear about that with myself, even now. Cassidy picked up the crowbar. My mother and father signed a document they didn't read because they were too busy counting money that wasn't theirs. The wall came down because Cassidy swung at it. The house was lost because they pledged it. I just stopped standing in the way of what they were already running toward. There's a kind of strength I didn't know I had until I stopped using all my strength to protect people from themselves. For years, I called that protection love. I'm not sure that was ever the right word for it. Real love, I think, requires that you let people be the size of their own choices. When I rescued Cassidy at 22, 24, 26, I wasn't loving her. I was keeping her small. I was keeping myself small too because every time I bailed her out, I told myself a story about how that was who I was. The responsible one. The wallet. The fixer. That story was a cage I had been the one paying rent on. The hardest thing I had to learn, sitting in that rented studio in Northern Liberties, watching my own bakery come down on Instagram, was that I was allowed to use my brain. Not just my back. Not just my checkbook. My brain. I had spent 10 months reading the Historic Preservation Code before I signed my lease, and for years I had treated that knowledge as a private inconvenience. The day I realized it was also a tool, the day I let Howard help me draft a document that just gave my family enough rope, was the day I grew up. If I could tell my younger self anything, I would tell her that being good and being a doormat are not the same thing. That patience is not the same as silence. That intelligence, used to protect what you've built, is not cruelty. That when someone shows you they would rather take from you than build with you, the kindest thing you can do for both of you is to let them try, all the way through, and let the world tell them what you have been too afraid to say. I bake bread now in a building with no sign. Most days I am tired in a way I recognize. The good kind of tired, the kind that comes from making something. I am not in touch with my family. I don't know if I will ever be again. I am still standing. That has to be enough, and most days it is.